Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the July monthly meeting for the Mildura City Council. I'll start with the prayer. Almighty God, we who gather together in council pledge ourselves to work in harmony for the welfare and development of our rural city. Guide us, we pray, in our deliberations. Help us to be fair in our judgment and wise in our actions, so that prosperity and happiness shall be the lot of our people. Amen. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders both past and present. I'll now move to the virtual council meeting statement. Good evening and welcome to the July virtual ordinary meeting of council, this Wednesday the 28th of July 2021. I welcome councillors, management and staff and those members of the public viewing the live stream or watching the recording at a later time. As part of our efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and in accordance with Section 395 of the Local Government Act 2020, this council meeting is being held by virtual means and live streamed on council's website. It is therefore not open to the public or for any person to attend. Tonight, some meeting participants are attending a council office to join the proceedings. This is to ensure they have an appropriate internet connection. Councillors are located in private rooms by themselves in accordance with the Chief Health Officer's directions. They are not required to wear a mask unless someone else enters the room with them. Several participants are joining from their homes and are therefore also not wearing masks. There are a number of requirements for the holding of virtual council meetings. Firstly, in order for councillors to be recorded as present at the meeting, each councillor must confirm they are here. They can hear proceedings, they can see all other councillors in attendance, be seen by all other councillors in attendance, and they can be heard to speak. When we move to agenda item 3, councillors present, I will ask all councillors to confirm this. Secondly, it is a requirement that all virtual meetings at council are made accessible to the public by being streamed live on council's website. A quorum for a meeting of council is 5 councillors. If for some reason the quorum required is not able to be met during the meeting due to councillors experiencing technical difficulties, we will temporarily adjourn the meeting and attempt to restore the connection for all councillors. This will also be the case should we experience technical difficulties with the live stream. Should we encounter significant technical difficulties that do not allow today's council meeting to continue at all, the meeting will be adjourned and those items on the agenda that have not been considered will be deferred for consideration by council to a later date, of which we will advise members of the public. When voting tonight, I will ask councillors to raise their hand. Please keep your hand raised until I have confirmed all councillors have voted, and I ask you to lower your hand. Should any councillors wish to speak to an item, please raise your hand and I will call upon you in the order that you've raised your hand. The audio and video recordings for tonight's virtual council meeting will be published on council's website within 48 hours of this meeting concluding. Thank you very much. I'll now move to identify all councillors and that they are present and can see and hear all other councillors. I'll go first to Deputy Mayor Helen Healy. Can you hear me and can you see all other councillors?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. I'll just go around the screen. Councillor Reynolds, can you see and hear all other members of council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I can see and hear all the other members of the council.
Councillor Cindy Power, can you see and hear all other members of the council?
Thank you, Mayor. I can see and hear all of you. Thank you.
Councillor Mark Eckel, can you see and hear all members of council?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can see and hear all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Liam Wood, can you see and hear all councillors?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see and hear all councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Milne, can you see and hear all councillors?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see and hear all councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Councillor De Pieri, can you see and hear all councillors? You're on mute, Councillor De Pieri. Could you please repeat that for me? You're still on mute, Councillor De Pieri. I'll go to Councillor Arney. Councillor Arney, can you see and hear all councillors?
I can, thanks, Mr. Mayor, apart from Councillor Dipieri.
I'll move back to Councillor Dipieri. Councillor Dipieri, how are you going? No, he's still having troubles. We'll quickly get an IT person in there just to make sure we've got that. So we'll just hold for a second until Councillor Dipieri works on his mute button. Still can't hear him.
Mr. Mayor, there's IT staff out in the hallway.
And he's standing right next to him, Glenn, and hopefully he's on it. Yep, we're just happy to wait until we get Councillor Dipieri online. Councillor Arnie, I notice you're in a wonderful position there with a very, like a woodland scene in the background. Is that downtown Werribee?
Yeah, not far from it. Not far at all. That's
Obviously,
how the entire Mildura can look.
obviously a lot more rain than we thought.
Exactly. How are you going, Councillor Dipieri? Have we worked through our mute situation?
Myself.
Councillor Dipieri, I could hear you then.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you see and hear all other councillors, Councillor
Yes, I
Dipieri?
can see and I can hear.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your
Mr. Mayor.
patience there. No worries. Okay, we'll move on to item 4. So that's all councillors are present. Thank you very much for that. Item 4 is apology and absences, and there are none. We move to item 5, which is a confirmation of minutes. Could I have a mover for that? Councillor Healy, and a seconder. Councillor Milne. The confirmations of minutes are for the ordinary meeting of council held on the 23rd of June, a confidential meeting of council held on the 23rd of June, the special meeting of council held on the 28th of June, a special meeting of council held on the 7th of July, a special council meeting held on the 15th of July, and a special confidential meeting of council on the 15th of July as well. We have a mover and a seconder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Sorry, I'll go back one step. Were there any objectors to this motion? I'll move the motion. All those in favour? Thank you very much, councillors. The motion is carried. We move on to item 6, confirmation of council auspiced meetings, with a recommendation that council note the following records of council auspiced meetings. There's a planning forum on the 21st of June, a community and council plan briefing on the 28th of June, Mildura South Regional Sporting Precinct naming decision on the 6th of July, and a council forum on the 14th of July. Could I have a mover for that motion, please? Councillor Milne, and a seconder, Councillor Power. Would anybody like to object to that motion? If there are no objectors, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. The motion is carried. We move to item 7, which is notification of absence, and there are none. Item 8 is the mayoral report, and 8.1, the mayoral report for June, with the recommendation at item 2 that council note the contents of the report. Could I have a mover for that motion, please? Councillor Healy, a seconder. Councillor Dipieri. Would anybody like to object to that motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you very much, councillors. That motion was carried. We now move to item 9, which is councillors' reports, and item 9.1, council reports for June 2021, with the recommendation that that council note the contents of these reports. May I have a mover for that motion?
I'll move with a correction, Mr Mayor, please.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel, and a seconder, Councillor Healy. And if anybody would like to speak to their reports, so Councillor Healy, any other councillors?
Mr Mayor, can Councillor Eckel point out his correction, please?
Yes, he can. Councillor Eckel?
Yes, I believe it was held at the that's the MRCC Youth Awards. That was held at the Golf Club, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
I was in attendance, Mr Mayor, and it shows me not being in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you for that correction.
And Mr Mayor, I'd like to add that I wasn't in attendance at the awards.
Duly noted, Councillor Arnie.
Thank you.
So any other councillors would like to make any adjustments to their reports? Okay, well, I will hand it over to Councillor Healy to speak to her report, and I'm happy to take other reports too.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two items. The first one is rather brief and the second one rather long. The first one is the Gender Equity Action Sunraysia Group has been invited to talk at 2 regional gender equity family violence forums, and they've been so well received. We've got 3 on the waiting list to hear about the work that's being done in our community and by Mildura Rural City Council in that area. So that's a great outcome for a grassroots initiative. The second one is in the last 10 days since Mildura Rural City Council were notified that Mildura had recorded a positive COVID test at the Mildura-based hospital. Both Mandy Whelan as a Municipal Emergency Officer and Martin Horson as a Municipal Recovery Manager, Pandemic Response Coordinator, began a process that has seen our staff do a remarkable and often selfless job doing whatever needed to be done to manage our response, which included setting up 2 testing sites, assisting with contact tracing, messaging and customer service. Around 60 MRCC staff from leadership, traffic management, facility services, landfill staff, admin support, emergency management, communications and contract tracing support worked tirelessly over these past 10 days. They've worked hand in hand with the incredible Shelley Fawkes, who is the person in charge of COVID testing at Sunraysia Community Health Services, along with her CEO Simone Held, and with Mildura Police and Bendigo Health Services. I want to thank them and all the people who stepped up, including those 700 people who went into quarantine, those who supported them and the testing site staff, and those whose businesses took a hit in an effort to keep us all safe. Now it's our time as a council and a community to support the people and the businesses impacted. We are currently, the state government of Victoria is currently the only government area in the world to knock Delta out of the park twice. And I'm very proud of our council and our community, especially the business community and the people who worked on setting up the sites for the part they played. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Healy, and I concur with everything you've said then. It's been an absolute mammoth effort by the community and all the agencies involved. Were there any other councillors who would like to speak to their reports? Thank you, everybody. We'll now move to item 10, which is responses to councillor questions, and there are none. So I'll move on to item 11, which is councillor questions. Do we have councillor questions? Councillor Healy, Councillor Power, Councillor Milne, I believe, and Councillor Wood. I'll go to you, Councillor Healy.
Councillor
Thank you.
Arnie too, Mr Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. Councillor Arnie. Sorry, Ian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. To quote a constituent, are we going to wait until someone is injured or worse when it comes to vehicles having priority over pedestrians on the riverfront? Our Mildura CBD Access and Mobility Strategy Plan has a target to reduce traffic and aiming a 25% increase in walking and cycling in the CBD by 2035. With this in mind, as we develop the riverfront, and it's fast becoming a much utilised and loved destination for our community and visitors, can we move the right-of-way back to pedestrians in time for the launch of the Powerhouse precinct? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Mr. Horson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, happy to have a look at that as part of the powerhouse redevelopment. Obviously, when foot traffic increases as part of that, it's probably timely to revisit that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horson. It was only the one question, Councillor Healy. Thank you. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a two-part question. One, would it be possible to review the speed limit on Curitin Avenue between 11th Street and Ballar Avenue, along with access for cyclists, pedestrians, those walking with prams? And it brings me to my second part of the question, where the speed limit there is actually 80 kilometers per hour. Two, the second part, there's no walking path along Curitin Avenue within the following roads: add along Forester, St. Michael's, Monarch, and Cook Street. There's no area that provides safe access to Kings Billabong to the walking path there, or to the 11th Street walking path. Residents are currently having to walk on the dirt shoulder with kids and with prams. Would it be possible to review these areas, please?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Power. Ms. Whelan, if you could take that, thank you.
Through you, Mayor, we can look at both of those issues and come back to councillors.
Thank you so much.
Just the one, just that's all, Cindy. Thank you, Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple on pedestrians as well. The first one was Hugh King Drive. That one's been dealt with. My next question was the recently installed pedestrian crossings on San Mateo Avenue have changed the onus from pedestrian to driver. They're very poorly lit at night and it's hard to see pedestrians, particularly those in dark clothes. Can lighting be improved for these crossings?
Would you like to take that, Ms. Whelan?
Through you, Mayor, we do have a lighting program to look at. Sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. We do have a lighting program that does look at these types of issues, and so we'll have a look at that and see what we can do.
Thank you for that answer. The next one is, can I have an update on the proposed or requested pedestrian crossing between Ritchie's Supermarket and the post office in Merbeen?
Ms. Whelan, could you have a go at that one too, please?
Yeah, we can provide an update on that to councillors. Sorry,
Thank
through
you.
you, Mayor.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. My next question is, how much land is ready to be subdivided in Orimple, Nichols Point and Redcliffs? That's land that subdivision has not begun. Do we have enough land to meet the current demands in those areas? And what is the timeline to get land ready if there's not enough land?
Thank you, Mr. Milne. Mr. Horson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Probably the best way to respond to this one is a lot of this detail was in a correspondence to councillors on the 26th of May. So I'm happy to resend that. The highlights of that correspondence basically mentioned that as an estimate, there's around about 6,000 potential dwellings across the more populated areas of the LGA, and at an average of 350 dwellings per year, this translates into about a 15 to 18 years supply. So that's a very broad answer. I know Councillor Milne's going into specific areas of Orimple, Nichols Point and Redcliffs, I think he mentioned. Obviously, the Orimple one will be picked up in the study we're currently undertaking now, which is the Mildura East Growth area, which will verify all those aspects within the Orimple area. The Nichols Point area, as councillors will be aware, is got a particular issue with the development contributions plan that needs to be addressed, and that's probably the one thing that's holding that process up. It's to do with an amendment with regard to the change in that arrangement. So again, Redcliffs is also detailed in the memo. So I'm happy to reissue that memo that I think picks up on a lot of Councillor Milne's issues in relation to the rate of subdivisions that have been let, that would have to be something that the statutory planning would have to detail what the rate is and how many how many houses have been issued with permits as opposed to ones that haven't yet. So that would be a more detailed response. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hawson.
Await the more detailed response. Thank you for that, Mr. Hawson. Mr. Mayor, my next question is, pigeons are a huge problem in Redcliffe at the moment, and I guess they're also a big problem in Mildura. Can we do something soon to cull the numbers or persuade the pigeons to go elsewhere?
I really don't know who to put this one to, but I'm sure there's some pigeon persuaders in the region. Ms. Whelan?
Through you, Mayor, we do have a pest control program where it relates to public or council property, so I can get an update about where that's at and provide that to councillors.
Thank you. I've got two more quick ones. We seem to have missed the closing of the Marrickville Community Radio Station that has happened in recent times. I'm wondering, is anyone aware of what the effect on the Marrickville community has been with the loss of their radio station? And could there have been more done to save it? Because it's a very much needed link amongst the people.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Is there a general manager throwing their hand in the air to try and answer that one? Just as an observation, I do know that 106.7 do telecast into Marrickville at certain times at the moment. Not a solution or an answer, but at least something. We'll take that on notice. I've just been advised. Thanks for the question, Councillor Milne.
And the last one is, where are we at with regard to a rate review or change in how rates are collected? As per our motions to ELGA and the MAV, have we had any feedback?
General Manager Parham, would you like to take that one?
Thank you, through the Mayor. I don't believe there's been any direct feedback in regards to what Councillor Milne has raised there. In regards to Council's revenue and rating strategy, we will be commencing the development of a new one in the new calendar year, and that will also consider some of the items that have been raised by councillors previously, including consideration of possible charges for vacant land or vacant premises. But that's about all I can provide at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm talking about a change, well, something to bring our rates down more in line with the rest of Victoria, or I guess essentially Melbourne. Have we got a plan? Our motions went along those lines. Have we got a plan, or are we going to develop a plan to actually pursue this with a little bit more vigour?
Through the Mayor, yes, we will develop a plan to pursue this. We're certainly lobbying the various levels of government, and I know, Councillor Milne, you've been quite vocal in regards to the state's position in regards to rating across the state, but that is certainly a platform that we'll continue to advocate for and we'll take into account when we develop our new rating strategy in the very near future.
Thank you, Mr. Parham. That's it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Milne. CEO Shanahan would like to comment on the rates issue at this stage.
Just to say, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Milne, in my short stay here, I have met twice with the local member of Parliament who was an initiator, I suppose, of some of this work as well, or this movement. And there is action. There is some action happening at the state level through the state member, and it does align well with the council resolutions that were carried. So I guess it's negotiating time, and I wouldn't want to spell out all of that because it's sensitive, but the member is painfully aware of the importance of that resolution and is working behind the scenes to see what can be achieved for mostly the rural councils that are in this kind of situation, in particular Mildura.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Shanahan.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Thank you, Mr. Shanahan. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we please revisit COVID recovery money as a matter of urgency? We've just come out of lockdown 5.0 and our businesses are doing it very tough. There's going to be long-lasting issues, and if we could revisit that as a matter of urgency, that would be great. Any help?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Wood. General Manager Parham or Hawson there, maybe?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Yes, at this point in time, based on the previous council resolutions towards the end of the last financial year, there's $120,000 which has been set aside for COVID-related activities. At this point in time, they haven't been specific, or that funding hasn't been specifically allocated, but yes, that is absolutely something we will consider.
Thank you, Mr. Parham. Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Arney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of times recently, I've noticed our parking officers walking along the edge of the roads. I guess it's because it's easier to observe the back tyres where they mark cars to see if they've overstayed their welcome in the allotted parking time zones. I just wonder how that actually fits with regards to OH&S and safety. With them walking along the back of the cars, so between the back of the cars and the passing traffic.
General Manager Whelan.
Through you, Mayor. So with any tasks that officers perform, they do a risk assessment on that. So there will be paperwork and documentation around what those officers need to be aware of in order to undertake their duties.
Okay, thank you. Can we please investigate that in future to minimise our risk? My next question is one that I've asked a number of times, and it's to do with retiring some of the rural laneways and roads so that we don't have to continue any sort of maintenance with them or any ongoing expense, that they be returned to the appropriate government agency. With possibly a recommendation that they be leased to an adjoining landholder. I just wondered where we are with that process.
General Manager Whelan, maybe? Or, oh, sorry, we might just take that one on notice. I think we know you've, oh no, Mandy's up on the screen now. Oh no, she's gone. Sorry, this is just a very strange scenario sometimes.
Through the Mayor, it's General Manager Parham here. That'll probably be a question that we need to take on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager Parham. Just the two questions?
No, I have a couple more, please.
That's okay, mate. Go for it.
Another one is the discussion around our insurance. I'm just wondering if General Manager Parham might be able to explain our current situation with regards to insurance.
Thank you, Councillor Arney, through the Mayor. I believe Councillor Arney is asking this question in relation to our work cover insurance. Council has been a member of a work cover scheme or a WorkSafe insurance scheme that was undertaken and put in place by the MAV, or the Municipal Association of Victoria. Our coverage under that, and also the scheme itself, will not be continuing. Council at this point in time has reallocated its insurance in regards to worker health and safety over to another provider who's approved under WorkSafe and their regulations. And most likely in the new calendar year, we'll go through a competitive process to potentially identify a new insurer. But fair to say that all our insurance is in place, and any claims that were underway with our previous insurer have transferred to the new insurer.
Thank you, General Manager Parham.
Thank you. And my last question, please, is if we could be provided with an update with regards to the online digital planning application platform and its progress from the discussion we had quite a while ago, determining the budget, just with regards to how soon that will be available for people to come online and check the progress of their applications, please.
General Manager Whelan? Or Parham, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, through the Mayor, I might take that one. Thanks for the question, Councillor Arnie. I can advise councillors and the community that the procurement process to select a preferred provider for that online platform is very well progressed. We're in the stages at the moment of negotiating some contract terms and conditions with the preferred supplier, which I'm very hopeful will be concluded in the very near future. Indications at the moment are that once those negotiations are completed and the contract signed, that we could have an online sort of presence and migration and implementation within approximately 6 months.
Thank you, General Manager Parham. Thank you very much for all those questions, councillors. Staff will be getting back to you as soon as possible. So we move on to item 12, notices of motion. Item 12.1 is lobbying for bus routes review, with a motion at item 2 that, having regard to the importance of a high quality public transport service for so many people living in or visiting the rural city of Mildura, and noting the very clear inadequacies and anomalies in the current bus service network for our city, and further noting that a proper review of bus routes has not been undertaken for almost 20 years, I move that the Mildura Rural City Council lead a public campaign to convince Public Transport Victoria to fund and undertake a comprehensive review of the bus service network in the rural city of Mildura. That was presented by Councillor Reynolds and seconded by Councillor Eckel. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Healy. Yep. Sorry. I'll ask you if you'd like to move it, Councillor Reynolds, if that's okay, because you presented the motion. And Councillor Healy, are you happy to second that? Could I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Eckel.
Unless Councillor Eckel wants to.
Councillor Eckel, sorry about that. I mixed that up a bit, but that's okay. So the mover is seconder. Do I have any objectors to that motion? Would anybody
I've got a question, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to take the question, Councillor Milne.
Have we written to the Minister for Public Transport, Ben Carroll, seeking a review of the bus routes in our municipality before we go down this path?
General Manager Whelan.
I'm aware it's been raised by our local member with state government, and we have talked to our regional counterpart, and this is the advice we've been given. Sorry, through you, Mayor.
That's okay.
So we haven't written to the Minister yet, though?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So are there any objectors to the motion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor De Pieri?
I'm not objecting, God forbid, but how do we, just a question, how do we propose to undertake a public campaign? What does that consist of? I mean, I'm all for campaigns, and our situation with public transport does need an awful lot of attention, but how do we propose to make this a practical thing?
General Manager Parham?
Sorry, through the Mayor, sorry, I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, but I believe, as General Manager Whelan mentioned, that we've discussed the requirement to undertake this review with regional counterparts and authorities, and believe that this is the best way to have that review of the bus routes undertaken on behalf of our municipality. So I'm not too sure if it's a campaign as such, as opposed to just a request to the state government to undertake that process. But I might defer to General Manager Whelan.
Sorry, my dogs are barking in the background again. But through you, Mayor, to answer the question around how it might be done, the advice we've been given is to get all the impacted parts of the community, other agencies on board to support that, and then we would present that to state government, the minister, PTV, to get the work done.
Fair enough.
Another question, Councillor
Another
Milne?
question. So have we got a budget for this?
Through you, Mayor, part of what we're doing is to seek that funding, that budget. So in order to actually do the work to provide the support for that to happen is within our current resources.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to object to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, do we have the
So-
opportunity of talking to
speaking
the motion?
I'm sorry. No, I don't think I can do that now after we've voted. We can't go back.
Well, I put my hand up to do that.
Well, I will make an exception. If you and Councillor Reynolds would like to talk to this, I will let you do that, starting with Councillor Reynolds first. Sorry about
Thank you,
that.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to the councillors for their questions. You know, it might seem like a really quite a simple task. Let's review the bus routes and make sure that, you know, our growing community has a public transport that's fit for purpose. And it might seem like a relatively simple task, but this is actually quite a huge task. This review of the bus routes hasn't happened for about 20 years. And there's a lot of areas where there needs to be some serious research done regarding single locations for interchanges, for example, bike facilities on buses, bus routes that use 18th Street. And we know that this is a really important issue for our community. For example, about 34% of respondents mentioned public transport in our recent survey for the 2040 vision. And 16% said that this should be a top priority. So this is a really important priority for our community. The best way to go about doing this is the way that General Manager Mandy Whelan has put the pathway for us to do it, which is to do it in conjunction with the community, hence the community getting involved as part of that campaign, so that we get them all on board and we get their feedback. These, after all, are the people that will be using this system in the future, as well as Public Transport Victoria, who will be actually performing that change and also be part of the mechanism by which we fund anything that we do. So thanks to Mandy and the staff for helping me put this motion together. I'm really looking forward to moving forward with this, and over time having a public transport system that Mildura can be proud of and is a highlight of the region and something that other people in the region look to in the future as guidance for their public transport systems.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Eckel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I concur fully with Councillor Reynolds, and I would suggest that if this motion goes ahead, that Mildura Rural City Council's comms department would have something significant contribution in this. But you have to excuse me, I have to go to my notes, which is up on the screen. And I'd like to add this, that MRCC people aged 65 years and over made up 19.1% of the population. And a lot of those people use our buses and would use them if we were able to have more routes compared with other geographic areas. Rural communities have greater gaps in senior transportation services, and that was recorded in the NCST in 2010. And serving seniors' travel demands helps support the local economic development of the town. Rural communities that develop such services can attract and retain more seniors and the economic activity they generate. So as we know, and I brought this up previously, in the 2016 Connecting Regional Transport Development Plan, all we get from that was the upgrade of bus stops in Mildura. So I think that Councillor Reynolds is right onto something here, and council needs to make an impression on the government in regards to this area, and the sooner we do it, the better. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel. I will now move on to item 12.2, the renovation of Elstead House, with a motion at item 2 that council list for discussion at an upcoming council forum the concept of seeking community group or private enterprise expressions of interest to undertake the renovation of the Elstead House located on the old Mildura homestead site and the possible future uses for that building. Could I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel, and a seconder? Councillor Milne. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Would anybody like to speak to that motion?
Yeah.
Councillor Milne?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is an important motion. Elstead has sat down on the site near the old Mildura homestead for, I don't know, about 12 or 14 years now, and it really needs to be brought back up to a usable standard. And I think given that finances are tight and it's often hard to do all the projects that we have, that we need to start looking at different ways to do business, and involving community groups, if there is a possibility of doing that, I think is a good way to get some things done that builds community pride, and it could also give some of our craftsmen something to do, something to be proud of. So I'm looking forward to the discussion around this matter to see what we can do and see what councillors think about it, and indeed probably get some feedback in the meantime from the community to see what they think about it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Any other councillor would like to speak to that motion? Councillor Eckel? You're on mute, Councillor Eckel.
I think the motion speaks for itself, Mr. Mayor, and if you go through the timelines there, there's some history around the house, and I think apart from what Councillor Milne said, I think innovative ideas is what we need for that particular building and for that space. And this could have gone straight to a forum, but I think it's important to get it into the agenda, and Councillor Milne agreed with me, to give it as much promotion as we possibly can, rather than just contain it within a forum, and the media and the public don't get to see how important an issue we find this, and how we would like to see it rectified as soon as possible. That'd be terrific if somebody could come forward, and we've got a lot of philanthropic people out there too that do a lot of great work behind the scenes in Mildura. You never know, one of those people might lend themselves to it. And I think it's an opportunity too for our comms department when we go out to report on this particular motion, that we could build on that too, and the opportunities that might be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eckel. I'll now put the motion to a vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. The motion is carried. We now move to item 12.3, a review of the Mildura planning zones, with a motion at item 2 that council list for discussion a discussion at an upcoming council forum the process and implications to undertake a review of relevant council planning zones to address current zoning anomalies, in particular correctly zoning parcels of land that are currently being used for purposes that do not sit correctly within the current zoning and identifying and zoning land for caravan parks and RVs. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, a seconder. Councillor Arney. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Councillor Eckel. Sorry. And Councillor Reynolds. Thank you, Councillor Milne. I'll now ask Councillor Milne as the mover to open the debate.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, there are a number of parcels of land in our municipality that are being used for purposes that basically don't fit the zoning. And some of those in particular are land that's being used for rural living, and there are blocks of those pieces of land. And I would like this matter brought to a council forum for discussion. So moving into a planning process is a big undertaking. It can be costly, but in our past reviews, a lot of these issues have been passed over, and I think it's time they were addressed. And I thought rather than bring it straight to a council meeting as a motion to seek that, it would be wise to take it to a forum, because that's what this is about. It's about listing it for discussion at an upcoming council forum to address those issues, and also in that process look at a way we can identify and zone land for caravan parks and RV parks into the future. Again, that will become part of the process, and we'd be able to seek the advice of our staff on how we go about this, the costs, etc., and have that full discussion in the council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. I'll now ask Councillor Arney as the seconder to speak to the motion if he chooses.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of the issues that seem to come up with planning come up again and again, and even though we seemingly have very few rejections, and maybe it's just the media's portrayal of what takes place, but there seem to be people in the community that aren't happy, and I get a lot of phone calls from people that seemingly aren't. And rather than wait until it's I think our third year or into our fourth year for a review, I just would like to, I guess, lead up to calling for one sooner rather than later. I've had the discussion with a number of councillors, including our CEO, who also agreed with the sort of line that Councillor Milne and I are taking. Hence my endorsement for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Arney. I'll now ask Councillor Eckel as the objector to speak to their objection.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Oh, I can, mate, yes.
Good. What concerns me about this motion, Mr. Mayor, is the lack of clarity to make an informed decision in defining where we have been and the detail of the ramifications if this motion is passed. And going back on what Councillor Milne has just declared there, if it goes to a forum, that we could seek a motion later on to seek whatever changes the councillors may need, just emphasises that issue. But what the motion is asking is for council to discuss at forum the process and implications to undertake a review of the planning zones and anomalies. That is exactly what we do every 4 years with the review process of the planning scheme, Mr. Mayor. I moved the motion to accept the planning scheme review in April of 2019 during the last council, which completed that process. And I believe the councillor should know the possible implications of this motion. The detail that the preamble in the agenda and motion doesn't detail is the following. I can be corrected, but I believe we had to employ a further 2 strategic planners to assist in the review process, which I can warn councillors is a very time-consuming process and expensive. This usually takes 12 months and then goes to the Department Minister for approval, which can take a further 3 to 6 months, depending on the new detail and quality of the review. In discussing this process as the motion indicates that a forum is how the actual process starts. So what the motion is asking is what pre-starts a planning review anyway. So I contend that now is not the time for that forum. I believe we should wait only about 12 months at this time, because I believe the new councillors will go into the next planning review with more experience and understanding of the complexities of the state and local planning framework, because that will be around about the time that we'll be looking at the review. So as councillors, we are all concerned and this is brought up all the time, with costs of unbudgeted items. The last review cost approximately $70,000, and another implication of councils deciding from a forum discussion is that it is an unbudgeted item. So if the councils decide to go down that line, I think December, the late November, early December is generally the time that we re-look at our budget, and I doubt very much at that particular time that we'll be looking at spending this exorbitant amount of money. The way this motion reads, I believe, is personally prescriptive and may not be the views of the councillors. And I'm sure my colleagues, will have issues that they would like to raise, and will have that opportunity. But will require our planning department's additional workload that at this time I believe is unnecessary as well. Secondly, point 2 of the notice of motion regarding the caravan and RV parks is unwarranted. This forms part of the current strategic planning schedule of work to be undertaken by council, which I'm awaiting the latest update as far as that work is concerned, and it's to be taken this financial year and is in the budget and is identified in the 2009 planning scheme review. So why that's sitting there, I don't know, Mr. Mayor. In view of the challenges our council is currently facing, I don't believe this is the time to go into this discussion that could lead to, well, it's a large subject matter. Hopefully this motion will be defeated and give way to the continued process to the commencement of our new planning scheme review at the appropriate time. As I declared, 2019 it was passed, and it's a 4-year planning scheme, so it was only 2 years to go. So let's wait and find out and let it run its course, because it'll only be the next 12 months that we'll be looking at that review, and we might have more issues that we can raise, Mr. Mayor. And alongside of that, there's other issues too that could be raised.
I think you're close to time, Councillor Eccles.
Thank you
very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eccles. Is there any other councillor that would like to speak to the motion? So that's speaking for the motion. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if I'm speaking for or against the motion. I'm still going to listen to the debate and make up my mind, but I think I concur with Councillor Eccles on some issues, but what I do think is really important, and quoting him, large subject matter, having been a councillor for just over 2 years, this subject matter of planning is just so huge and such a huge responsibility for us as councillors, and the more we get to talk about it and understand it, the better. So I don't mind it coming to a forum and having this discussion, and it doesn't necessarily mean it will lead to a premature review. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Councillor Reynolds, and then Councillor De Pieri.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Mark on a lot of issues there. I am, as other councillors know, I am all for reviewing planning and reviewing planning schemes. I think that is a really important thing that we've got to tackle as a council going forward. But on the other hand, this particular motion, it propels us into that review too early, I think. We are going to be going into a review process as per the normal timing of that. I don't think we need to enter into it at this stage. It is too early. We've only been 2 years into the current scheme, and I don't think we can really tell at this stage what all of the issues are that we need to address in the current scheme. I think we need to let this scheme play out a little bit more, see where the problems are a little bit more, so that when we do go into the review process, we're fully informed about what the things are that we need to address. So I think letting it play out a little bit more is important. And I agree with Mark that it's an expensive process as well. And so that the longer that this is drawn out, the more it's going to cost us as well to do this process. So once again, but let's stick with the normal process, and we will be doing it within about 12 months anyway. And finally, I think that I do find this particular motion rather prescriptive as well. The fact that we're, talking about particular plots of land and particular anomalies and bringing caravan parks and RVs into it, I think that the review that we do has to be an overall review. Yes, it should look at anomalies of land parcels that probably aren't working at the moment. Yes, it should actually look at, do we want to have land that's currently zoned for farming, for example, to be rezoned so that we can use it for other activities? That's important too. But we need to look at it as a whole and not be prescriptive and directive about what we're looking at and why at this stage. So I'd rather see a more holistic view and not a prescriptive point of view from certain councillors. And the other thing is that, as we are new councillors, we are learning about this process, as Mark has pointed out, and this will give us a little bit more time if we go through the normal process to learn about what's important for us to address and go into. What I would like to see is a motion that says, let's go into a forum and discuss this a little earlier. So not actually starting the review process, but starting the discussion process. What can we do as councillors, and what do we need to know going forward? I certainly don't mind going to forum and discussing it, but not from this prescriptive direction, and not necessarily going into a review immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Is there any other councillors that would like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor De Pieri? You're on mute, Councillor De Pieri. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, mate. Thank you.
I just think that we ought to consider this motion in the spirit that it is presented, which is, and ignore the part that is perhaps jumping the gun and being, as others have described, somewhat prescriptive. I think that one should concentrate on that the council is for discussion at an upcoming council forum, not specified when, the process and implications, therefore the difficulties, the processes, what it takes, in other words, to review the council planning, etc., etc. I think it's loose enough to be considered as a viable motion. I would add that, in fact, it is prescriptive in some regards, and in some other regards, it ignores other considerations which come in at this time with use of horticultural land, as I have written recently to our leadership team in relation to climate change. Because there's no point arguing for example, I'm just only making this example in passing, the use of upholding the use of certain agricultural areas in the context of people possibly abandoning land, given the fact that climate change is upon us, plus the cost of water, making matters even worse. So what I'm saying here is that if we take it in the right spirit, I think that a discussion is not going to hurt anyone. It's not jumping the gun, and I trust that the way the discussion will be structured and presented will not be down to nitty-gritties of which piece of land is good and which is not, but it would be a broad, intelligent consideration. And yes, it will cost money. It's not something we can undertake. It will, I think, the situation concerning planning and the economy, and the two things go together, requires an enormous amount of knowledge and skill and expertise. And obviously you have to bring in economists, planners, environmentalists, and so on. So this is the discussion to be had, and this is what I take from this motion. It is worded perhaps in an awkward and somewhat reductionist way, but the spirit of it is what I tend to be inclined to support.
Thank you, Councillor De Pieri. I'll just ask one last time if there are any councillors who would like to speak for or against the notice of motion. If not, I will hand it back to you've already, sorry, Councillor Reynolds, you can't have a second go.
Can I have a question?
Yes, a question is fine.
Can we reword the motion on the fly now to make it a little bit more in the spirit that we all seem to agree with?
If you would like to propose an amendment and the mover and seconder are happy with that, we can move on from there.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Reynolds can't propose an amendment. She's already spoken to the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Other councillors could do that if they wanted to, but I appreciate your experience, Councillor Milne. If nobody would like to propose an amendment, I'll hand it back to Councillor Milne to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to point out that this is about a discussion and there aren't timelines on this or the outcome of this motion. It's about bringing the discussion to a council forum. It's not committing council to spending money or undertaking the actual review. It's about information, and it's about getting information to the councillors and look at what's involved. There are a couple of anomalies. Now, Councillor Eckel has at some length explained to us the whole process that he's been through over the last, I don't know, 20 years or something, including myself. But through that process, we still haven't got land for RV parks or caravan parks. So there's been a failure either on our behalf, his behalf, or the process behalf that's resulted.
Councillor Milne, I don't think you can point out a single councillor's fault there.
No. Well, we're the only two that have been in that process. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
If you're mentioning the two of you, I'm happy with that.
I did. That's what I said, that we've either both of us have been unable to get that in place. We need some discussion around that because it hasn't happened to this point. And some of these other small areas that I'm talking about, we haven't been able to get those addressed either. So we need to understand, and councillors need to understand the processes. They need to understand some of the issues. I believe that these are issues. There's obviously other issues, but people's concerns about budgeting, about going into the process too soon, that's the reason why I've asked for it to come to a forum for discussion. That's the point of it. The council lists for discussion at an upcoming council forum, the process and implications to undertake a review. But we need some discussion around what are the issues, because as Councillor Arnie and other councillors have said, planning is a huge issue and people have problems with it and we need to understand it. And if we're going to change anything or anything that we see as being the main issue or a serious issue or an issue that needs addressing, we need to understand those processes. We need to understand how, why, when, the cost, and how we actually have more meaningful input. I would like to see more meaningful input. I haven't been able to achieve or see a change in some of the issues that I believe need to be addressed. It still mightn't change either. But as for being prescriptive, they are examples of some of the issues that we face. And there well may be others. That's why you have a discussion. What comes out of that discussion might be something completely different, but at least we will have had the discussion. And I think I'll leave it there. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I've got a further question before the motion's put, if that's okay.
Yes, Councillor Eckel.
I still think that part two of the motion is inappropriate because we already have that going. So I don't know whether the mover and the second would like to delete part two of the motion.
I'm just getting some qualification on the process and the procedural base of Councillor Reynolds' question about the amendment. I'm just going to mute for a second. Just bear with me. Thank you, councillors. So our governance officer has checked, and Councillor Reynolds is able to move an amendment, and she can present that amendment to Councillor Milne and Councillor Arnie, and if they're happy with that, we can amend it as said. If they're not, then we would have to go into a different process, have a seconder, and then debate the nature of the amendment, not the whole process again. Councillor Reynolds, I think the ball's back in your court if that's in this scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I agree with the other councillors that there is a central spirit of this motion that I definitely agree with. The quicker we get into forum and start discussing this, the better. So what I guess I will find is that the wording is going to be very important, and the wording could come back to haunt us, as it often does. So I'd like to see the actual part 1 and 2 of this motion removed, perhaps, and just leave it at the council list for discussion in upcoming council forum, the process implications to undertake a review of relevant council planning zones and address current zoning issues.
Councillor Milne and Councillor Arnie, are you prepared to accept that slight amendment to what you've presented and already begun a wonderful basis for debate if this came through to us?
Look, yeah, I don't think that doesn't change it at all. It doesn't change the issues because those issues still remain. So they'll still get raised. So, look, you know, if that's what it takes, I'm happy to accept that.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Milne. Councillor Arnie, how do you feel about that amendment by Councillor Reynolds?
Yeah, I agree. No, I'm happy for that to go ahead. Thank you.
So the amended motion will be point 2, the motion as read, with the point 1 and 2 deleted, and we move on having debated. And now, after Councillor Milne putting his final words in, I will put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hands. The motion is carried. Thank you very much for the robust debate, councillors. Now we actually get to the body of the meeting. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I forgot about deputations. So item 13 is petitions, joint letters and deputations. I'm still waiting on a deputation. I haven't seen one yet, but there are none. And now we move on to item 14, management reports. Item 14.1 is the adoption of the Hatter land use plan and recommendation for 174 Cootamundra Avenue, Redcliffs, with a recommendation on item 2 that council agree, and I'll only read the first one, agree to the responses and recommendations to the submissions received to the Hatter land use plan December 2020 as detailed in the response to submission summary table 28 June 2021 as presented and as read. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, a seconder. Councillor Healy was quick off the mark there. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.2 on page 90 of your agenda, amendment of the budget 2020-2022 document, with a recommendation at item 2 that council adopt the rates in the dollar as per the table below. Do I have a mover for that motion?
Got a question.
Moved with a question, Councillor Milne?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I notice in regard to, on page 91, the Mildura City Heart special rate, oh, sorry, I think it goes over the page. There is no dollar value for the City Heart. We see cultural and recreation, but if we go to the bottom of the table at page 91, there's no, well, Mildura City Heart's dropped off the special rate and there's no figure for it. And that is the same on page 90 at point 2. Mildura City Heart special rate has dropped off the bottom there and there's no figure. Could we have an explanation of that and the figure, please, if the figure's available?
I thank you for the question, Councillor Milne. General Manager Parham.
Thank you through the Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Milne, for that question. It would appear that through the process of I guess sort of changing the documents from Excel spreadsheets into PDFs and getting through to the agenda, it looks it appears that the bottom line has been cut off that table. So you're absolutely correct. In regards to the Mildura City Heart special rate, the dollar figure that should be on the bottom of the second table, or the table F, as per the adopted budget 21-22, the figure should be 247,756. And in the amendment that that's been put forward tonight, that figure should be 244,675. So a slight reduction in what is the capital improved value of those properties. But you are correct, and my apologies. That line has been cut off the bottom of that table during the document transfer process. So we'll add that to the minutes if that's okay with councillors and the Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Comfortable with that, Councillor Milne? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, we had seconder was Councillor Reynolds. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.3 in the agenda, on page 93, adoption of the financial borrowing policy CP072, with a recommendation that Council adopt the new financial borrowing policy CP072 as presented. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, a seconder. Councillor Eckel. Would anybody like to object to that motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.4 on page 100 of your agenda, Audit and Risk Committee Chairperson's Biannual Report to Council, 1st of January to the 30th of June this year, with a recommendation that Council receive the Internal Audit and Risk Committee Chairperson's Biannual Report for the 6-month period stated above. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Healy, a seconder. Councillor Power. Would anybody like to object to the motion?
I've got a question, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to take the question, Councillor Milne.
My question, I've just got to go back to the agenda, is around on page 102. It said due to the COVID-19 restrictions that were in place during August 2020 and February, some staff having chosen to take leave during the period due to concerns about needing the access to their leave, etc., etc. There seems to be concern about staff that they might be put off and need that leave. I would like, if anyone can speak to the amount of leave, is that being addressed? Have we got staff with too much leave? And yeah, has anybody or any staff member been stood down during those COVID periods? So that relates to this report.
General Manager Parham.
Thank you, through the Mayor. There's actually probably quite a number of elements to this. I guess at that point in time that was being referred to, the situation in regards to COVID in the community, let alone the country, was quite unknown. We did have a number of staff who were building up leave, I guess sort of in excess of what was sort of desirable from a financial perspective and in regards to our enterprise agreements, but staff were understandably unsure sort of what COVID was going to entail, and people had to cancel holidays and trips and so on and so forth. Since that point in time, we have presented to the audit committee in regards to staff leave balances, and dare I say it, as COVID has become a little bit more of a normal way of life, COVID normal, however you define that. Staff have been taking leave and rostered days off and so on and so forth. So with the last report presented to the audit and risk committee in regards to leave, we could see those leave balances sort of being in hand. But that is something that we will monitor on an ongoing basis. But I think as staff and the community, as we become a bit more used to the situation that we're in now, people are taking some leave, some RDOs, even whether we can or can't go interstate.
Yeah, thanks for that answer.
Thank you, General Manager Parham. Councillor Eckel, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'll just go to dot point on page 103, and the committee noted advice from management in February 2021 of a proposal to allow the General Manager Corporate Services to represent Mildura Rural City Council in an observational capacity on the Mildura Airport Proprietary Limited Audit and Risk Committee. Just asking the question relative to that. Is there any involvement at all of Mildura Regional Development in this area?
General Manager Parham again.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So I believe that the comment there that Councillor Eccles was referring to is in regards to the airport. In regards to Mildura Regional Development, like the airport, they do present to Council on a regular basis, whether that's by forum or obviously the reports and so on, that are presented to Council with the annual reports and any budget aspects. There are meetings which do occur on an ongoing basis with MRD. We do have a presence at that meeting, at some of those meetings. However, in regards to the board meetings and so on, we're not a director or have any sort of voting rights in those. But yes, we do participate in meetings with MRD. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Parham. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have a mover and a seconder. Would anybody like to speak to the motion after those questions? Councillor Healy.
Speak now?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Oh, it's more after it's passed. I'm happy for the recommendation to go through and then speak to the report.
We can't do it that way, Councillor Healy. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
We have to do it between the nominating and the voting.
Okay, just to clarify, I'm not speaking for or against it. I just wanted, at this stage, it's being a member of the committee as a deputy mayor, I'm just very aware that Frank Piscianeri is retiring from the committee, and I just wanted to acknowledge his work formally as the chair and as a normal member now, but just the work he's put into this, and what a pleasure it's been to work with him, and thank him on behalf of council and the entire committee for their good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. I concur with everything you've said then. I will now...
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I'd like to concur with that too, as being a past mayor, and that gentleman being on the board at that particular time, not as the chair, but as a board person. I'd like to hope that we will send him a letter anyway and thank him for his services. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Healy, for that.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.5 on page 119 of the agenda, adoption of the S5 instrument of delegation, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council revoke the S5 instrument of delegation from Council to the Chief Executive Officer executed on the 24th of March 2021, adopt the S5 instrument of delegation from Council to the Chief Executive Officer as presented. Once adopted, authorise the person holding the position or acting or performing the duties of the Chief Executive Officer's the powers, duties and functions set out in the attached S5 instrument of delegation, subject to the conditions and limitations specified in that instrument, and note the temporary changes to the delegation of the Chief Executive Officer or Acting Chief Executive Officer as resolved at the special confidential meeting of Council on the 18th of March 2020 will continue for the duration of the COVID emergency. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Reynolds, a seconder. Councillor Milne. Would anybody like to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, everybody. The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.6 on page 126 of the agenda, the adoption of the S11A Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation, with a recommendation that Council, in the exercise of the powers conferred by Section 1474 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987, resolve that Tracy Shuang, Town Planner, be appointed and authorised as set out in the instrument as presented. That the instrument comes into force immediately following a resolution of Council and remains in force until Council determined to vary or revoke it, and the instrument be sealed. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor De Pieri, a seconder. Councillor Reynolds, I saw your hand go up. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.7 on the agenda, page 130. Use and development of a caravan park and creation of access to a road in a road zone category 1. With the recommendation that Council, having caused notice of planning application number 005.2020.00000310.001 to be given under Section 52 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and of the Planning Scheme, and having considered all the matters required under Section 60 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987, decided to issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in respect of the land known and described as Lot 1 PS 213398 for the use and development of a caravan park and access to a road zone category 1, with the application dated 30th of November 2020, subject to the following conditions. Do I have a mover for that motion? No mover. Councillor Reynolds, happy to move it. A seconder for that motion. Councillor Healy. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Councillor Milne. I will now ask Councillor Reynolds, the mover, to move and open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to speak I'm going to speak I'm going to speak in favour of the motion to reject the recommendation, to reject the application, I should say. I think that this goes back to what we were discussing before about planning and about we do feel that there are some things that we need to address, but this is the zoning that we have in front of us. These are the regulations and the rules that we have in front of us. The permits that come to us need to be objectively looked at in light of the current rules. So what we are proposing to do is to look at these current rules and see how we can do planning in a way that is that we can all agree is in a way that is sustainable and planned. And by undermining the rules that we have currently, to me is not the way to go. I think that we need to look at our planning and look at the way that we look at these permits and these applications in the rules as they exist, and think about changing the rules later on. So for me, as the rules exist, this application does not meet the objectives of the clauses as they exist, and I would have to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I will now ask Councillor Healy as the seconder to speak to the motion if they choose to. Are you on mute, Councillor
Thank you, Mayor
Healy?
Modica.
Sorry, mate.
First of all, I have a question. This actual motion was laid on the table at the 23rd of June meeting, and I would like to know, has it come back with any new information for the reason it was laid on the table?
Through you, Mayor, the report is
Thank you.
tabled exactly as it was presented last council meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. So basically, I just concur with everything Councillor Reynolds said. There's 10 reasons outlined here why it does not fit with our existing planning scheme, particularly the issue of agricultural land in Mildura older irrigated area. And I'm also mindful of our previous discussion that this is a huge subject area planning, and I think we need to be listening to our planning department, who are giving us the best advice, and following the laws around planning, because I know many councils get into trouble by knocking too many or allowing too many things that contravene the planning schemes at both the state and the local government level. And whilst I'm aware that we are losing caravan parks and need RV places, I've been out to have a look at the property. I'm not sure it's the right place for a caravan park or an RV park, but because of all these contraventions of the planning scheme, I will have to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. I will now ask Councillor Milne as the objector to speak to his objection.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is obviously a difficult application. There's been quite a bit of discussion about caravan parks, where they fit, where they don't fit. It revolves around land use, and in particular the farming zone and irrigated land. And I would draw everyone's attention to the planning delegation report on page 211. And some of the language, I understand why it's used, but when we talk about land being removed from Mildura's irrigation district, well, the land isn't being removed, it's still there. A lot of the reasoning for not allowing this, and this use is allowable in the farming zone. It's not a prohibited use. It is allowed, but the report really is all about taking land away from the irrigation district, that it clashes with irrigated land. It's got no link to agriculture. It takes away the future use. But then if you go down to point 9, we see where the development would allow unplanned urban development within the Mildura Old Irrigation Area, and a use and development that would be prohibited within the future zone, which is Industrial 3 zone. So we've got a plan to remove all of this land from the farming zone anyway, and to take it away from the Mildura Irrigation District. So all the basis that this report is written on is actually going to be taken away anyway for industrial use. So I have a problem with, is industrial use a better use than farming? Is it a better use than using it for a caravan park that's needed? I look at Benetook Avenue. I've been on council for 16, 17 years, whatever it is. We've talked about the bypass on Benetook Avenue, industrial land being developed along Benetook Avenue from 14th to 15th. that's been developing over the last, well, my time in council. So we've only got to 15th Street. We've a long way from 16th. That might take another 20 years. This is between 16th and 17th. And it is opposite what is basically a tourist farm that is in that area. And yes, it is farming technically, but it's got another use as well. And looking at the development of Mildura, I can see that this land or the industrial use may not happen for 30 or 40 years. If we look at properties that have been dried off along Benetook Avenue, on the corner of 14th and Benetook, that land there stopped farming
Councillor
probably
Milne,
15 years ago.
Councillor Milne, I'll just reiterate that we're debating on the planning issues at hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And this is related to that. That land
in regard to what the planning rules are on the land, not speculating on what it might be. Just a point of clarity there.
No, I'm not speculating. I'm talking about how long it takes to develop that land and how it sits there and isn't used for 15 or 20 years.
But we can only consider the application on
that's exactly right.
Overlays the land that it's on right now.
And the land that that we're talking about isn't going to be redeveloped as farming. If it's for future use as industrial 3 and it's a small lot of land, why would you plant it up and spend a fortune irrigating it for such a short period? And indeed, it hasn't been there. It's sat vacant. It's had sheds and all sorts of things on it. It hasn't been used for another use.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
And
point of order, Councillor Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the point of order is that once again, we do have to discuss this based on the current zoning, and I think that what Glenn's referring to is a future zoning, which is referred to in the report. But once again, we're speculating as to, how long this might take, what might happen in the future. Let's keep it as what we have now. These are our rules and regulations.
Sorry,
Does
Councillor
this
Reynolds,
application meet these rules and regulations?
You've called a point of order. I need to know what the point of order is, and I have to make a judgment on that, Jody, rather than enter into debate.
Sorry, the point of order is that this isn't necessarily related to the application that we have in front of us.
I will override that in the essence that I've warned Councillor Milne that we should be debating the essence of the planning rules that overlay the land we are now, and I appreciate that, and happy for you to call again. But I'll give Councillor Milne a little bit of latitude but to try and keep it to what the actual planning rules are on the land at the moment, because they're two very separate issues: a future plan versus the one we're trying to govern it on now. So I'll override it. Thank you, Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would point out that the report does talk about the future use. So it is part of the report. It specifically says that would be prohibited within the future zone, industrial 3. So the actual report itself does talk about a future zone. And my point is that we've had caravan parks built on 15th Street in the past. The zones, they've been built in the farming zone. The zones have changed in the future. And that's why we don't have caravan parks now.
1 minute, Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is because the zone has changed. There's been a higher and better use, and those properties have in fact changed zoning and become various things from bulk stores or whatever else because they were a higher value to the owners, and they then fitted in with, the movement of the city towards 15th Street. So personally, I struggle with all the reasoning, and I think that this is a good use for the land, and I believe it does fit in with the objectives of the planning scheme, and it's certainly not prohibited in the farming zone. So I'm not happy to support the motion to deny the development. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Would any other councillor like to speak for or against the motion? So no other councillors to speak?
Now, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Councillor De Pieri.
Could the CEO or someone else in the leadership team clarify this point made by Councillor Mill that the use is not prohibited?
General Manager Whelan, could you, or CEO Shanahan maybe first?
I'll have a go because it'll be funny if I can't do it right. The use is not prohibited. There are three kinds of uses. There's prohibited uses. That means you can't do them whatsoever. There are things you can do without a permit, and there's not many. And there's things you can do if you obtain a permit. This is a use which requires the issue of a permit. It's not an as of right use in the zone. In other words, it's not a use where you don't need to apply. It's not prohibited in the zone. It's a use where a permit is required.
It's great semantic in some ways.
I'd like a clarification. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I'll just check with Councillor De Pieri that he's happy with that response.
It leaves me in limbo among those who are suspended, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor De Pieri. Councillor Eckel?
Don't know what that means. Right.
You should have come to my Dante lecture.
I did. Could I have a clarification, Mr. Mayor, from Ms. Whelan? I read somewhere in the report that it's partly in the farming zone, a part of this land.
No, it is in the farm. Sorry, through you, Mayor. It is in the farming zone, but I think what you may have read is actually still partly being farmed. The land is still partly being farmed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will ask any councillors would like to speak for or against the motion. I will now hand it back to Councillor Reynolds to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'd like to thank Councillor Milne for his discussion. I mean, what he points out is that we've got one set of rules that this application doesn't fit into, and we've got a future set of rules that this application won't fit into either. So we've got a plan, we've got an existing plan, and we've got a future plan, and in neither of these plans will this application and this use of this land fit into. What we've got to do as a council is go back and have a look at our planning, and we will do that as we've discussed earlier. But under our current set of rules and in our future set of rules, we cannot accept this plan. It's the same as our planning department have given us a list of reasons why we cannot accept this plan, this application. It doesn't.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Mayor. If we couldn't accept this plan, it would then be prohibited, and it wouldn't be before us.
I will take that point of order. Sorry, Councillor Reynolds, I shouldn't say sorry. I'm the adjudicator. That's it. And I think that is
approve
correct.
This application, perhaps.
Sorry, I will. Yes, that's a. I'm going to adjudicate myself. I'm just going to mute for a second, if that's okay, for a bit of suspense. This is why we love planning so much, everybody. So I will. I agree with Councillor Milne. It's not prohibited, but it does need a whole lot of tick-offs to get it done. So, Councillor Reynolds, if you could reword that, I'll let you go on if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry if that wording was not clear, but I guess what I'm saying is that as a council, we're now in a position where we can either approve or reject this particular application. So we have to base that on the current rules, and I won't go into that again. And under the current rules, we can't approve this application. But it goes back to the planning scheme and the planning rules that we will be looking at soon. And I think that hopefully in the future we will have more clarity around our planning, and we will be, and whatever we come up with in the next 2 years, hopefully future councils will respect that. Future councils will see that there was a vision that we had for Mildura, and future councils will be able to see that this is how Mildura will grow and prosper and become a place that's workable and is sustainable as a region. And so what we will develop is something that is usable and good for future councils to use. And previous councils have come up with this plan, and I think that we should respect that. So at the moment, we recognise that there's changes that we want to make. So let's make those changes then, and use the current rules that we have with us now when we're thinking about this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Reynolds. I will now put the motion to a vote. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. All those against the motion? The motion is defeated. We haven't made a decision.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a further motion.
Yes, Councillor Milne.
That Council approve this application with or the development with appropriate conditions, including that the park infrastructure, toilets, etc. are constructed before the administration building or residence.
Just a clarification, sorry for a second, everyone.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Mayor.
I already put my hand up.
Gone through the whole process.
That might need some refining.
So happy to receive that as a notice of a decision to proceed with what you've stated, Councillor Milne, which was
yes,
and seconded by Councillor Healy. No, Councillor Healy had her hand up first. That was correct, Councillor Healy?
That's right.
So now, well, but does anybody want to object to the new motion? Would anybody like to speak to the new motion? Councillor Eckel has a question with a thank you.
I have a question. During the process, during when the applicant made his presentation to the council forum, there was a suggestion in regards to timelines of industrial, when the industrial parameters would be brought in over farming, and that they would abide to a timeline around that. Can I have some clarification on that? And if no clarification to be given, I wonder whether that can be a consideration too in the application, because it was put up by the applicant's representative.
General Manager Whelan.
Through you, Mayor, yes, our understanding is a timeline can be put on it.
Well, with the mover's consent, I think that should be, and the seconder, I think we should be visiting that opportunity in this motion.
Oh, I'm happy with that, Mr. Mayor.
So Councillor Eccles, did you want to nominate a time, or is that something we work with
No.
the planning department?
No, I just work. No, the planning department work with the applicant, and there are. I believe that the meeting has been recorded, was recorded, so the opportunity to revisit that issue in regards to the timing element, and for that to be I'd like to see that in the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I think that could fit under appropriate conditions.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor
I
Milne. We'll
agree.
put that in
Yep.
under appropriate conditions. So would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I'll put the new motion. All those in favour? All those against? The new motion is carried. Thank you for the spirited debate, councillors. We now move to item 14.8, page 213 of the agenda, an amendment to an existing planning permit to include additional land at 126 Riverside Avenue, Mildura, and additional buildings and works, with the recommendation at item 2 that council, having cause notice of planning application number 005.2014.000000288.002 to be given under section 52 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987, and having considered all the matters required under section 60 of the Planning and Environment Act 87, decide to issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant an amendment to a permit under the provisions of clause 32.08/2 and clause 36.08/6 of the Mildura planning scheme in respect of the land known and described as 315 10th Street and 126th Riverside Avenue, Mildura, for the proposal to include land at 126 Riverside Avenue and additional buildings and works for the following reasons, etc., etc. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, a seconder. Councillor Healy. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Would anybody like to speak to the You'd like to speak to the motion, Councillor Milne?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this matter concerns me greatly because it is about providing accommodation for workers within our town, within the city boundaries. And I believe it's one that we really need to look at discussing further at some stage, because there is a need for worker accommodation, and obviously looking through this permit, the issues and everything that addressed, the people that objected, it's a really difficult thing to fit worker accommodation into our city. But then when we look at putting worker accommodation into the farming zone, there's a whole number of other issues that raise their head there. And so we're left in this limbo with where do we put them? And I think we need to be putting both these issues to the Minister at some point to work out how we really address the issue of worker accommodation, because, there's arguments on both sides. And I'm also concerned a few years back, I spoke to the High Commissioner of Vanuatu, Mr. Sampson Fair, and he was literally in tears over the accommodation that his people were living in while they were working in Mildura. So it really is an issue, and we've got to work out how we can deal with this, how we can get good accommodation for workers that is very respectful, that has our workers living in conditions that we'd be happy to live in ourselves if we were working, and where we actually put that accommodation. So thank you for giving me a bit of latitude on this one, Mr. Mayor, but I'm very sincere about this being an issue, and we do have to work out how we're going to address it, because it doesn't seem that it fits anywhere.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Quite an important topic in a horticultural and agricultural region. So are there any other councillors who would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally concur with Councillor Milne. When I saw the budget that was to be expended on building 12 self-contained units for 12 workers, I was mystified as to the quality. But in addition, I agree that we do need farm workers accommodation, and I know we've got some opening quite soon on 10th Street, which is great, and that fits in very well with the surrounding community. But this doesn't fit in with the neighbourhood character and doesn't integrate at all with the streets. And I agree with Councillor Milne. We have to have respectful, comfortable, and within walking distance of facilities. But this doesn't fit that picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can't disagree with what Councillor Milne or Councillor Healy have just said, but the thing about this application is that there's nothing that will guarantee that this accommodation will be used for agricultural workers. There's no force to make sure that this accommodation will be used for that purpose. So, you know, it was introduced in that way to us by the developer. But really, at the end of the day, what we probably need is accommodation that is designated for the use of agricultural workers somewhere. I agree with you all that we need to think about this in the planning. This accommodation, that's not necessarily going to be it.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I will now, if all councillors have had their say, I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the motion? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you again, councillors. Planning is always top of the list when it comes to good debate, I'm sure. We now move to urgent business. Where's my paperwork? Oh, there it is. And we have two items of urgent business. One which will be in confidential, and we will be asking just to put this into confidential. So thank you, councillors. We do have two items of urgent business tonight. The first is a matter that will be dealt with in confidential, that the recommendation before us is that council admit to business the urgent business item titled Appointment of Acting Chief Executive Officer to be dealt with as item 17.6 in confidential business. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eccles, a seconder. Councillor Milne, you were very quick then. Would anybody like to speak to the motion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just step out of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hawson. Yeah, sorry. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to?
Hasn't it been entered into confidential? Isn't that what we're doing?
Oh, yeah. But sorry, hang on. 2 secs, people. So sorry, just some clarification. This is just to admit it to confidential, not to debate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what I'm, yeah.
Yep. So we've got a mover and a seconder, and now I'll move to the vote on admitting it to confidential business. All those in favour? That item is admitted to confidential business. Yep, thank you. Sorry for the confusion. It's been quite a long night. It's back. The second item.
Monica?
Councillor Healy?
I just wondered about the urgent business and the motion we had, which is not confidential business.
No, we're moving to that now, Councillor Healy.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. You've got me covered on all angles, Helen, which is awesome. I need a little bit of a push occasionally. The second item of urgent business tonight is a notice of motion submitted by submitted to the CEO by Councillor Arnie. The recommendation before us is that Council admit to business the urgent business item titled Notice of Motion Mental Health due to COVID and other factors. Do I have a mover for the recommendation to admit it to, moved by Councillor Arnie, seconded by Councillor Power? I will put it to the vote to admit this to urgent business. Are there any objectors to this being admitted to urgent business? No, I'll now put the vote to admit this to urgent business. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion is admitted to urgent business. So we'll go through this now, and we have the urgent business at 15.2 is the notice of motion, mental health due to COVID and other factors. With a motion at item 2 that Council call on the Chief Executive Officer to advise Council of any need for additional support or resources that we can advocate for to support our community, or where we are able to provide direct support to the community, our staff, and to all councillors. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Arnie, a seconder. Councillor Power. Would anybody, is there anybody would like to object? We're just going to check if General Manager Horson's back online. That's all. Sorry, we'll continue. I think he's getting back online now. Are there any objectors to this motion? Are there any councillors who would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Arnie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is quite straightforward, but it's a very serious issue in every community. Certainly is a problem. Well, problem is not quite the right word. It is an issue in our community, and every time we have COVID locking down businesses and preventing people from working, it has a huge impact on their life. Just the fact that people can't socialise, kids can't go to school, makes a huge difference to the way they feel about their lives, and we need to provide as much benefit as we possibly can. I'll just leave it at that, but it is a very important issue that we need to address and continue to address.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnie. I noticed Councillor De Pieri had a question.
No.
That's from before. Okay. I will now ask any other councillors if they'd like to speak to the motion. If they don't, I'll put the motion. Councillor Power, did you want to have something to say?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. Everyone knows I concentrate a bit on families and family violence, that sort of thing. So with this motion, it's also important to notice that it's dealing with council employees, everybody, community. And I'd asked the question a few months ago, like what mental health support is available to those who are first responders. I'm thinking about maternal child health nurses, that sort of thing, who deal with families who are in lockdown and bringing new babies into the world, raising toddlers, that sort of thing. It's very stressful. So just wanted to emphasize too that we're talking about just supporting the staff as well, and what kind of backup is there for them. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Power. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. We now move to community questions, and we have two.
Mr. Mayor, the first question is from Mary Hollingworth, and Mary writes, I'm inquiring what provision is being made for Mildura Music Society and Little Theatre in terms of a permanent place for rehearsals and costume storage. They also need a space for the painting of sets. With the receiving of grant monies from the government, I hope that consideration is being given to these societies which have given so much joy to the community.
Thank you for that question. We'll pass that on to you, Mr. Horson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we do have some plans afoot regarding the broader plans for those groups, and we might contact them directly and talk them through probably from the shorter term to the longer term. I know the staff have been in contact, but we'll reaffirm that those arrangements are in place.
Thank you, General Manager Hawson. And one more question, Mr. Shanahan.
The second question is from Eileen Picker, and Eileen asks, does Council have a map showing the boundaries of each town in the municipality? And if not, why not? And if so, why have I received an Australia Post postcode map when seeking a council map showing the accurate outline of Irimple boundary?
I think that's another one for you, General Manager Hawson, isn't it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I know the staff have been in contact with the author of that question in recent times, providing them with a more accurate map, or a map that we often refer to as part of that. So again, we'll contact Eileen and make sure that the information that she's got recently is exactly what she's after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Manager Hawson. I note we're getting towards the end of the meeting, but we have confidential business to go into. We have 6 items this evening. 17.1 is the Powerhouse Precinct redevelopment schematic design. 17.2 is the play along service review. 17.3 is the proposed asset acquisition. 17.4 is the independent audit and risk committee membership. 17.5 is the amendment to the contract 1718/4 hire of road construction trucks and trailers. And the other urgent business is 17.6, the appointment of the acting Chief Executive Officer. Could I have a mover to go into confidential business? Councillor Arney, a seconder. Councillor Wood. All those in favour of moving into confidential business? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody tuning in this evening on the live stream. I really would like to applaud the community for their efforts of getting through a very, very strange and difficult week, plus all the agencies that put in and really made us a very tight-knit community that went over and above to cease the spreading of COVID. So thank you very much for all that, and we'll see you at the next meeting.